Good evening, everyone. I, Anvesha Ghosh, on behalf of Into Legal World, welcome you all to the webinar today on practical application of marriage law. So, I am Advocate Anvesha Ghosh, currently practicing under VH Kannada Associates and Advocates, which is based at Gujarat, Jamnagar. Furthermore, I have completed my LLM from NLU Ranchi and was fortunate enough to be the University Gold Medalist and have won the Endowment Medal for Corporate Law Specialization in the batch of 2017 and 18. I have done my LLB from Vidyasagar University, affiliated to Haldia Law College, and thereby I was the University Gold Medalist as well. So today, Into Legal World has brought this webinar, and I am very excited because this is something, the topic, practical application of marriage law, is very connected to our everyday life. And also, there is an eminent academician, and I welcome her to this webinar today. And I have been very delighted to have her today because I have been associated to her as well. Before I give a short introduction about MAM as well, I would like to introduce the Institute Into Legal World. Into Legal World is a trademark of Parivrit Enterprises Private Limited, which is an established name in the legal fraternity. Into Legal World is a platform connecting the entire legal fraternity with its various wings, such as online news portal, publication house, legal services. Into Legal World Institute is shortly going to bring an application, which is Into Legal World application. We at Into Legal World have been serving our fraternity by providing quality legal notes in the form of legal articles, legal notes, lecture notes, etc. And we have been doing this since 2016. Into Legal World is now embarking into the field of training and teaching. We have various courses, and our faculties are honorable judges, advocates, as well as other members like academicians and all. So we also are awarded, the institute is awarded with DIPP and ISO certified. Under publication house, we have 55 plus publication, which is registered in the name of Into Legal World Publication. And this channel is, we have 1300 advocates to provide entire range of legal services. We also have monthly magazine called Into Legal World Magazine, which is a compilation of briefs on important judgments from High Court and Supreme Court of each month, as required by PCSJ aspirants and advocates. This is founded by Mr. Amresh Patel and Ms. Richa Shukla at a very young age. I am glad to share that Into Legal World has been recognized as first legal setup of UP under Startup Indian program. And today, we are mentoring more than 10 startups around us. So we are introducing our speaker today, who is Dr. Sangeeta Laha, who has done her master's in Pol Science and MBA in marketing. She has also done her LLB and LLM from Patna University and have been awarded PhD from University of Calcutta. Currently, she is practicing also, and she's an academician. She's pursuing her postdoctoral program. She has published a book titled Women and Legal Profession in reference to Indian context, which has been published by Satyam Law International, New Delhi in 2014. She was assistant professor in WBNUJS, CNLU Patna, and has worked in Amity University, Lucknow. And she has also now a dean of NLU Ranchi. So we welcome you, ma'am, in today's session. Over to you, ma'am.
Good evening, Anvesha. Thank you very much. And I'm honored to be in this platform, also honored for your lovely introduction to me. I will be into the topic. But before I go into the topic, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me and thought that I am of that level to deliver some sort of a lecture, or maybe some giving you some ideas about the practical applications of marriage laws. Now, I do not want to go much into the personal law today. That I will do in some other day. But today my focus is on the cases that has been rising up. I mean, in between February 27 to March 22, 2020, in between the COVID-19 pandemic is which concerns me and must be concerning many of us, is the rise of crime against women. Now, although there has been the rise of crime, but what we have found through the data shared by the National Commission of Women is that there has been 123 cases of domestic violence, which has been received between February 27 to March 22nd. So in the last 25 days, that is in between, in the month of February and March, there were around 239 more such complaints. So this is a very agonizing part that as to why even there's a lockdown, people are not going out. But why is this that there has been a rise of domestic violence in India? Also, the NCW has shared the data that is in between February 27th, that there has been from March 23rd to April 16th, they have received lot of complaints, and from around and these complaints are across the country, out of which it was surprising that there were very less number of cases. Those cases that had very less number of cases, COVID cases, there the domestic violence, the data of domestic violence has increased. Out of which, what I found was Uttarakhand was having 727 cases of domestic violence reported during the pandemic period. So this is a very aggravating factor as to what are the reasons that have increased the number of domestic violence in India. Now, another alarming bell that has sound for the Punjab police is there has been a 25% increase of crimes against women in the state, with 700 cases reported of domestic violence during the curfew period. So there has, what we find and what I'm trying to tell and impress upon you is the substantial increase of domestic violence in the state. And although the police is formulating specific strategy to resolve the cases within 24 hours, but then it is also very difficult to do that. So there again, the National Commission for Women have established a helpline. They have established a WhatsApp number so that they can have some solution to the problem, or they can reach the complaint as far as possible. But at the end of the day, what we find is that women do not want to resist this harassment or humiliation, or they do not want to come to the police because the society, they are scared of the society, they do not want to ventilate out, or there might be a stigma attached if the husband leaves her in destitution. So there may be innumerable factors as to why many of the domestic violence cases goes unreported. Now, therefore, what we come to a general conclusion is domestic violence has become a way of life. And it is not that it is confined to the lower strata of the family. It is not that. It is not a case. Even if it is, you will find such cases among the middle class or among the upper middle class families, that it has become a regular feature. Now, to a law student who has just now graduated out, or who are aspiring to become a judicial officer, what type of clients or what type of the nature of problem they will encounter in the early stages of their career? And that is what I'm trying to focus today. Now, some women may say that she's not eligible for maintenance, or how she would get maintenance or alimony after a divorce in India, and in what cases can she have an alimony? That is a very prime question a woman would want to know if she's separating out from her husband, or she has been left destituted by her husband, or she has been abandoned by the husband. So this is a first question she may encounter, or she may ask the lawyer concerned. Or she may ask, what is the procedure of filing a maintenance along if she has a child? And will the child get that maintenance or alimony amount? So we have got a plethora of laws in India. But why I'm focused on the domestic violence is that recently, for the last, I mean, this is 2020, for the last 15 years, we have got an act, that is the Domestic Violence Act. And why this Domestic Violence Act has come into being? Because our constitution under Article 15 subclause 2 states that the state can make special provisions for women and children for the realization of the right of equality. So it is a duty bound for the state to make a legislation to safeguard the women and children also. And therefore, under the Constitution, because it has been mentioned, it has been provided under Article 15 subclause 2, this is the background of why we have the Protection of Domestic Violence Act, the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005. So the law is in response to the needs of the women for the protection of women against the Domestic Violence Act. And prior to this, we also had one law that came out in 1985, is the Dowry Prohibition Act. So as the situation demanded, the legislature thought it wise to have a legislation, because even today, women and children, the minor children, are the vulnerable section of the society. And therefore, there was a requirement of a legislation, and therefore the legislation became effective. So the second question that can be mooted in a lawyer's mind or a mind of the student is, why go under Domestic Protection Act? Because it gives a speedy remedy. And in a short span of right, we know that litigation in India is very time-taking. So to give the victim a speedy remedy, to give the protection under protection orders, a Domestic Violence Act can be applied to the offences concerned. Now, in domestic violence case, two sections can generally be attracted, which is a very common section, that is Section 498A of the Indian Penal Code, clubbed with the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. Also, if there is a demand for money, Section 3, read by Section 4 of the Dowry Prohibition Act, can also be applied to. Now, but before we file a case under the Domestic Violence Act, it is necessary for all of us to know the meaning or the definition, the legal definition of the word domestic violence as per Section 3 of the Domestic Violence Act. So how the domestic violence is discussed here? It is said that it is a violent act of one spouse on another in order to gain power and control by instilling fear and subservience. So what are the elements? One element is the power of authority. So the man is in authoritative position to the woman concerned. So if he's in a dominant power, we have the patriarchal setup in the society, and in every household, it is generally the man who takes the decision. So the woman has to be subservient to her. Second, showing the authority, he's instilling fear. So a fear psychosis goes down the line, that if I don't obey him, or if I don't follow his dicta, what happens is I am subjected to fear. The second element is fear, and the third element is subservience. So these are the three elements that conjointly join together and makes an act a violent act. So and two, it has to be a domestic relationship, which means a relationship between two persons who live or have at any point of time live together in a shared household. So the definition of shared household has also been explained in the Domestic Violence Act, and it says if both of them are residing either by way of a rent or they have spent certain amount of time because of the relationship, either through consanguinity or through marriage or through a relationship in the nature of marriage. So if it is in the nature of marriage, the act has given recognition to live in relationship. So women who encounter a violent act of violence, even in live in relationship, is also entitled to get a relief under the Protection of Women from Domestic Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005. So this legislation has gone it's a radical legislation wherein live-in relationship has been recognized or is now quite common, is becoming quite common in some of the big cities of India. So woman who has encountered any type of domestic abuse or humiliation can easily bring a case under the Domestic Violence Act. So a relationship in the nature of marriage, adoption, or a family members living together as a joint family, all of them come under the Domestic Violence Act. So what does it include? It includes A, harm, 2, injuries. Injuries of what nature? Injuries which endangers health, safety, life or limb or well-being of a woman. So it, in a way, comes under the definition of cruelty, what is spelled out under the Hindu Marriage Act. So although cruelty has never been defined, but what we find is injury to, not only injury to such an extent to life and limb, a one day of physical abuse is enough to prove a case that it has been a domestic abuse or a humiliation or an harassment. So domestic violence is thus does not only include physical abuse but also mental, sexual, emotional and economic abuse. So there violence has been here in this act. It has been categorized under 4. 1, it is a physical abuse, which also includes mental abuse. 2, sexual abuse. 3, emotional abuse. And 4, economic abuse. So the definition of abuse has been more expanded in the Domestic Violence Act. Now, in India, what we find is 55% of the women suffer from domestic violence, especially which are the states? The states are UP, MP, just now I mentioned Uttarakhand, which has been topping in the list, much to the surprise of others, northern states, including Punjab, as I told you. And as per the United Nations Population Fund report, what they spelled out is 2/3 of the married Indian women are victims of domestic violence attacks. So these are some of the statistics that speaks out that this is a kind of abuse which should not be ignored, which in a way the victim should not be remain silent, and such a violence is, at least we must raise voices against such a kind of abuse. Then so the question is, why not it is still not reported? It's still not reported because, as we know, the Indian women, especially the rural population, even small town women, they like to stay with the husband, tolerating the abuse in the interest of their children. So when the children comes in their life, they do not want to break the marriage or do not want to go away from the household affair, because even still today, though we have entered in the 2020 year, divorce is still stigmatized. I mean, preferably a divorcee or a deserted woman or a hapless woman, it doesn't get a status in the family, or she is taken to be very easy woman. A man can do anything with her. She's taken for granted. So these may one of the reasons why the woman prefers to stay with the husband, and not only a husband who is abusive, who is also alcoholic. So day and night you will find many an incident you must have come across where a woman comes and says that he has come and had been his tone was abusive. He was beaten. She was beaten. She was battered because he was drunk in the night. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason is the women do not want to get involved into legal battle. And in India, the legal battle takes for years. So matrimonial disputes will not end up within 3 or 4 months. It will take long time. Even a case under mutual consent, that is Section 13B of the Hindu Marriage Act, where both are even amicably decided to separate out, that also takes a longer time. So apart from the time taking period, it is also financially not supportive to the victim. So victim cannot, a lot of time is, a lot of money is spent on the lawyer's fees, on the filing of the case, on the dates when the case come up for hearing. So women do not want to get involved in this long legal proceedings. Either it may be for financial disability, or because of public shame and scrutiny, people keep on questioning her as to what had happened. So these are some of the results why domestic violence doesn't get reported. So, but then I feel, and many of us will feel, that at least we must raise our voices. You have to raise your voices against the gruesome act of the husband or his relatives, rather than quietly, sometimes silently bearing such a torture is also not preferable. It doesn't sound too wise. As it is, I'm not happy, so why not get away from that relationship, is nowadays people must look for. So domestic violence, therefore, the Act provides a breach of order obtained in a criminal offense. And if there is a breach of order, again, the magistrate might take action against it. Now, domestic violence, please keep in mind, is a civil law. And it has been enacted for protection orders, for protecting the woman, and it doesn't meant to penalize or punish the offender. Although I have said that 498A gets attracted, but the legislation independently, if you see, is actually protecting the woman rather than penalizing the offender concerned, so-called offender concerned. Also, it recognizes the right of residence of women. We, as such, as a student of law, myself, in the prior to 2005, no other law spelled about the right of residence in a shared household. So whenever she was thrown out, the law that you might be knowing is, we have the law in the Hindu Marriage Act. We have the law in the Adoption and Maintenance Act, which speaks about getting maintenance to the destitute or the hapless wife. We have Section 125 of the CRPC, but none of the law spelled about the right of residence in her in-laws' house or in a shared household if once she's thrown away by her husband or by her relatives of her husband. So that way, the Domestic Violence Act has come as a protective armor and gives a quick remedy. So it recognizes the right of a woman to live in a violence-free home. So what is the objective of the act? It says the woman has to be free from violence. So she has a right to live in a violence-free home, and that she should not be facing any violence. So that the legislation, this act has made it very clear. It also provides temporary and emergency relief to the victim. So this is one of the reasons why domestic violence is very much talked about and gives a speedy remedy to the victim concerned. It has certain crossovers. There may be a conflict, certain crossovers, because as I told you, 498A 3/4 brings, and also the act can be clubbed together, making it a domestic violence case. But it is only when the protection order of the magistrate is violated, that is, the criminal law gears up into action. So till then, the magistrate passes an order, that is, the judicial magistrate passes an order. If it is not obeyed by the offender, then only the criminal law starts gearing into motion. Now, as a law student, as a final year law student, or the student who is passing out, who is new in the field of law, what is considered, the main thing, what I'm harping is, what is considered as a domestic violence under the law? Now, Section 3, as I told you, it includes physical abuse. And physical abuse has been explained as an act or conduct which is of such a nature as to cause bodily pain, harm, or danger to limb, life, health, or impair the health. B, psychological, emotional abuse, causing an abuse. You're driving the woman to such an extent that she is psychologically and emotionally very upset, causing and that abuse is multidimensional. You're not physically abusing her, but you are driving that woman into a psychological and emotional fear. Third, which is also very common, is sexual abuse. This also comes under the Domestic Violence Act. Fourth, economic abuse. You are wherein the aggrieved person is entitled under the law, or whether or custom, whether payable under or by the order of the court. So under this section, under Section 3 of the Domestic Violence Act, if she's not financially taken care of by her husband, then she can bring the case under this section. So in a way, it has enlarged the definition of domestic violence. And then, so therefore, it is a comprehensive piece of legislation. Now, the moot idea for bringing this domestic violence is that there has to be a basic infrastructure system to ensure the presence of counseling. Counseling is a part before the final order of the magistrate is passed. Counseling, shelter, legal assistance, and appointment of the lawyer, registration and training of key persons like protection officers, counselors, service providers to perform their duties and functions have been laid down in the Act. So not that the objective of the legislation is to hook the offender, but actually before passing the order, the magistrate till the last would like to go for a conciliation process, try to settle the matter between them, or try to counsel the parties concerned, maybe counsel the husband or counsel the wife, if she's thrown away from the household, then there should be a shelter, homes. All this has been laid down in the Domestic Violence Act, which no other legislation has covered till date. So to my mind, it is a beautiful piece of legislation. If really being effective, it can really help the victim from the pathos she might be encountering in day-to-day life. Now, the second question comes. The first question is, under which section you can file the case? The second point is, against whom you can file the complaint. Now, generally, we have a feeling that the complaint can only be filed against the husband. No, that is not the case. In Domestic Violence Act, the complaint can be any person who has abused the victim, who come under the definition of domestic violence. And obviously that includes the husband, relatives, in-laws. So against them also the complaint can be filed. The third point is, the woman who is staying in a live-in relationship with a man can also file a complaint against him if he has committed an offense of domestic violence. So therefore, the expansion, the horizon of domestic violence has broadened here. Now, the third point is where the complaint can be filed. Since the woman can file a complaint, the victim, the witness who has been witnessing such a violence against her, any service provider like an NGO, if she's not comfortable to file herself, then she can take help of an NGO through a protection officer, and that NGO can help her, assist her in filing the case. So a woman can file a complaint to who? To a protection officer. Now, what do we understand by a protection officer? A protection officer means, as per the law here, who is appointed by the state government under subsection 1 of section 8 of the Domestic Violence Act. So he is a government official who has been appointed to look into such kind of act. And what are the steps that are taken? First step 1 is the complaint has to inform the protection officer. So first step is informing the protection officer. Step 2, aggrieved woman should be informed of her right. So once she has informed about her nature of abuse before the protection officer, it is the duty of the protection officer to tell her, to make her aware of a right, and including that, she can also inform a police officer, service provider, or a magistrate who have received a complaint should inform about her right. And what does the right is that her right to make an application for obtaining relief by way of protecting order. So the magistrate, although if she's not an educated woman, if she's doesn't have so much of qualification, if she does not understand the complexities of law, it is the prima facie duty of the protection officer or the police officer or the magistrate to make her realize that yes, they can give protection orders to save her from the day-to-day abuse. Now, the duty of protection officer also lies to liaison with the service providers, including shelter homes and medical facilities to the women concerned. She has also the right of under Legal Service Authority Act to have free legal services. So all this is the duty of this protection officer to provide her with all these services. Now, what is the step 3? Step 3 is, now after receiving the complaint, the protection officer makes a domestic incident report. It is known as DIR in short, to the magistrate, and forwards the copy there to the police officer in charge. So he, like an FIR report, he makes a report forwarding it to the magistrate under the jurisdiction where this offense has been taken place of, and he ensures that the aggrieved person should get all the benefits of service providers which are being maintained, and the aggrieved person has access to counseling, shelter homes, medical facilities, etc. from time to time if required. So this is the duty of the protection officer. Now, alternatively, the victim can also lodge a FIR to the police officer, and as soon as the police FIR is lodged, the police officer has to get into action. The third alternative remedy or relief or the forum that is available to her is the magistrate, and in the form of a magistrate, which means a judicial magistrate of the first class. Or if it is a city, a metropolitan city, the metropolitan magistrate who exercises the jurisdiction under the Code of Criminal Procedure of 1973 in the area where the aggrieved person resides temporarily or otherwise, or the respondent resides, or the domestic violence is alleged to have taken place. So the jurisdiction also falls of the judicial magistrate to have and to hear such a complaint from the victim. So we have got 3 persons. Number 1, I again repeat, is the number 1 is a protection officer. Number 2, one can lodge an FIR. And number 3, if she is hesitant to lodge an FIR, as simple as it is, she may bring a complaint before the magistrate. Now, here is what is the duty of the magistrate. The magistrate shall fix a date of hearing, which shall not ordinarily be beyond 3 days. So if today, on 31st May, if the complaint is lodged, that means by 3rd of June, the magistrate shall take cognizance and shall send the copy of the notice, that is the copy of the summons, to the protection officer to get it served to the offender concerned, that is to the respondent concerned, and he has to dispose of the matter prior to 60 days. So you can jolly well imagine why I'm trying to tell you that this is a very quick remedy one can, as a lawyer, one can give to the victim of domestic violence. So within a period of 60 days from the date of first hearing, the magistrate has to dispose of the application. So now we have understood the duty of the protection officer. We have understood the role played by the police officer. We have also understood who is the competent authority where a complaint can be filed. Now, what is the step 4? The step 4 is, once the matter is with the magistrate shall fix the first date of hearing, which shall ordinarily be beyond 3 days from the receipt of the application, and shall endeavor to finish up, to dispose of the application within a period of 60 days from the date of the first hearing. Now, we come to step 5 now. Informing the respondent of the date of hearing. Now, who is going to do that? Obviously, the victim cannot do. She is already victimized. She is already psychologically drained off because of having day-to-day abusive languages faced by the family, by the husband concerned. So the victim, you cannot expect the victim to serve the notice. What the magistrate does is, magistrate singly asks the protection officer to serve the copy of the notice to the offender concerned. In the meantime, the magistrate may seek the assistance of the person, preferably a woman, who is expertised in family welfare, for assisting him or her in discharging the duties. That is, if the victim needs counselling, if the offender needs counselling, this experts can help them and counsel them to patch up the differences. Now, once she's thrown away from the house, she cannot go to a parental place. Where is the alternative she can be placed into, or she can be put into? Here comes the role of shelter homes. So, aggrieved person has a right, although she has a right to the shared household, and she has been thrown away. During that interim period, the magistrate, after giving both parties an opportunity of being heard, and satisfied that domestic violence has taken place, can pass a protection order or a residence order direct to the respondent to pay the aggrieved person a monetary relief in addition. So in that interim period, she has 2-3 reliefs. One, she can stay in the shelter homes. The protection officer can make available the shelter homes to her. 2, during the until and unless that complaint is disposed of, that 60 days, and that is at least for a period of 2 months, the magistrate can ask the respondent to give her financial benefit. So that much of care the magistrate shall take care of. And once the order is passed, that is the protection order is passed, that copy has to be given to both the parties as free of cost to both of them. Now, what is step 9 now? If the protection of, what happens? The question may come to your mind, what happens even the protection order of the magistrate is breached? I mean, it is not being obeyed. Then in that case, the offender can be punished with either imprisonment or fine or both. So then here is where the criminal law gears up into action. Till now, it is a remedy to protect the victim. Now, in spite of the magistrate passing the order, is where now he can go ahead, punish the offender either with an imprisonment or fine or with both. What is the step 10? That is, who will ensure that all this is done? Who are the persons? Who are the authorities who will ensure that there has to be a protection officer, there has to be a service provider, there has to be a shelter home? Obviously, it is the central and the state government that takes measures to ensure that the provisions of this act are given wide publicity, either through media. The state government including police officers, members of the judicial services, etc., are given sensitization, periodic sensitization and awareness of the working of the Domestic Protection Act. So from time to time, training are given in this matter. We have a judicial academy in Jharkhand, which is quite active in giving training to the judicial officers, to the assistant public prosecutors from time to time regarding the working of the Domestic Violence Act. So there has to be an effective coordination between the service providers, the concerned ministries, the department dealing with law, home affairs, health and human resources, and that there is a periodic review of the same. The magistrate also has a right to take the proceedings in camera. And what is the proceeding in camera? It is an in-court proceedings where only the magistrate, the recording, the evidence of the victim is recorded, and if possible, if she takes the help of the lawyer or the NGO, that service provider, he or she has to be present there. So this is what is proceeding in camera. So these are some of the essential features of the law regarding the functionality of the domestic protection of the protection of domestic from Domestic Violence Act. Again, as I told you, since the victim has the right to file the victim, what can be the prima facie evidence? I mean, you to prove that domestic violence has taken place under Section 3 of the Domestic Violence Act, you have to naturally prove, you must have some evidence to prove, to prima facie prove a case. So when the complainant takes the help of the service provider and she is relating that incident to her, it can be put it into writing. It can also be recorded as an audio, or she has come with a complaint before the protection officer. The protection officer must record that into writing so that it can be, he can put all this as an evidence before the magistrate concerned. So actually, the protection officer is assisting the magistrate in the case of Domestic Violence Act under under the Domestic Section 3 of the Domestic Violence Act, under 498A of the IPC, also under Section 3 and 4 of the Dowry Prohibition Act. So all these sections can be clubbed together. Lastly, is the involvement in the case is if the woman doesn't want to come to the lawyer, doesn't want to go to the court in that way, the NGO who is working in this area can assist and help the victim in getting some relief. So, and the domestic incident report must be prepared by the protection officer, because for further investigation of the incident, and also it acts as an evidence to help the victim from getting relief. So these are some of the procedural ways of how you go with this act. Now, what are the duties now with the of the protection officer? Number one, in execution of the duties, he has to, as I told you, he has to do reporting to the magistrate of domestic violence incident in a form and in a manner that is prescribed in the Act. So upon receipt of the allegation, he has to transmit the copies to the police officer in charge of the police section within that limit, and he has to also report it to the magistrate concerned. Now, as per Rule 21 of the Domestic Violence Act, the functions of the protection officer is enlisted, and one of the primary function is to protect the victim from any further act of domestic violence. So whenever she's coming into it, from the date she gives the report, the alleged offense, he must take into account how to protect the victim. That is one of his first duty. The second is, as I told you, who must send the copy to the magistrate. It is also one of the duties of the protection officer is to assist the victim concerned, making a complaint of an application, a complaint in a nature of complaint or an application under the Act. He has to assess, give legal aid, and obtain medical facilities to the victim. Also, he has to make her aware of her rights. So these are some of the duties of the protection officer. then the police performing the role, the police has to also perform their role under Section 498A of the A of the IPC, and therefore there must be they must need to create an institution and apprehension that has been expressed by the woman, that they are no she is not any further subjected to domestic violence. The NGOs should also maintain a record in their register. There has to be a register, and also it has to be a registered NGO, so that the report can be written by the person who are working in the NGO. Such record keeping is crucial. As I told you, it has an evidentiary value in the eye of law. Now, under Section 15, the magistrate can requisition if if the need of an NGO is required. The magistrate can requisition the services of a person engaged for promoting family welfare to assist him or her in discharge of the duty. Under Rule 35, counseling can also be directed only after the passing of the order of interim relief. So, as I told you, counseling is also a part where the magistrate has to discharge with before passing a final order. And Rule 38 states that the perpetrator shall not be allowed to plead any justification for the alleged act of domestic violence. Why he was violent, why he had done such a humiliation, an act of insult, or constant abusive languages. And many a times in a society, this is a general feeling that if the woman doesn't give birth to a son, she's abused, as if she's at fault. So the husband and his family, in order to carry on the family lineage, abuses her for not giving birth of a child. I have had encountered several cases where the woman goes for the third and the fourth child simply because earlier she had 2 or 3 daughters. She needs a son, and therefore there is a lot of, as I told you, psychological pressure on her to give birth to a son. So all this leads to a lot of counseling to the man concerned if he is adopting a violent act towards his wife. Also, Rule 39, it provides for negotiation of settlement. So if there is a dispute which the cause the magistrate or the protection officer has understood, initially it is their duty to negotiate and to come to a settlement between both the parties. And Rule 40 provides that the counselor shall not be bound by the provisions of the Indian Evidence Act. So although evidence is required to be produced before the magistrate, but there are other means also where the counselor can be guided by the principles of fairness and justice. Now, I have already told you the procedure for filing a case under Domestic Violence Act. Now, what are the orders that a magistrate can give? Now, this is the final part of the case. The order can be, on the request, the court can pass the following orders. What is number 1A? That is the protection order. When the court can restrain the accused not to commit an act of domestic violence further on the victim or on the victim's family, and can disallow him and can also disallow him to enter his place of employment or residence. So in case the woman is employed and the offender quite often visits his working place, uses abusive languages, throws tantrum, the magistrate can give a protecting order in regard to it. So in a way, he is trying to help the victim not getting further abuse. That's one kind of order, and it is known as protection order. 2, residence order. Now, what is a residence order? Because she's thrown away from the house, the court, if he is satisfied, he or she is satisfied that a prima facie case is made out, then and there is no other place to stay, then he can also prevent the accused from dispossessing the victim from her matrimonial home, and can even disallow him to enter that area of household in which she is residing. So that is the second order the magistrate can give. Third, as I told you, interim relief by way of monetary relief. So the magistrate can ask the offender to incur whatever expenses, by legal expenses or medical expenses, for any loss that has occurred due to the offense. So if she has been hit badly, if there has been abrasions in her skin, then the magistrate may ask her to pay all the monetary expenses. The magistrate can go for the custody of the child. So give a temporary custody to the child, to the person who has made the application. Then compensation, in addition to the above relief, protection relief, residence protection order, residence order, monetary relief, custody of the child, the magistrate may also ask the offender to compensate for the loss that she has incurred due to such an offense. So compensating any damages for the injury, including mental torture, emotional distress, any act of domestic violence. So these are the nature of orders that the magistrate can pass in a domestic violence act. And if the woman is still not satisfied, she can file an appeal, but the appeal has to be filed within a period of 30 days. The last is enforcement of the order if there is a breach of the order. That is how the order can be enforced. In such a case, the breach of the order of the court under the Act shall amount to cognizable, non-bailable offense, warranting immediate arrest and summary trial of the accused. So these are some of the measures, some of the procedures a lawyer should know and should take a step while filing a case under the Domestic Violence Act. Or a woman who still, after getting the enforcement order, sees that the husband is not obeying, especially in terms of monetary relief, she herself, by way of affidavit, can give before the protection officer that there has been a breach in enforcement order. Now, I will discuss with you some important cases, three important cases where which is a very landmark case so far the domestic violence is concerned. The first case is, which I'm going to discuss in brief, is S.R. Batra and another versus Srimati Tarun Batra. And this has just come after 2 years of the enactment of the legislation. And it has been reported in 2007, volume 3, SCC, Supreme Court Cases, at page 169. Now, what happened in this case? Now, just a brief in this case is, this Tarun Batra was married to one Amit Batra on 14th April 2000, who is a son of S.R. Batra. So, Mr. and Mrs. Batra, it was a double-story house in Ashok Vihar, phase 1 of Delhi, where on the second floor, Mr. and Mrs. Batra was residing separately, while in the ground floor, the entire property was actually exclusively belonged to the mother-in-law, that is Mrs. S.R. Batra, and the couple was residing in the ground floor of that building. Now, when Amit Batra, that is the husband of Taruna Batra, he filed a divorce case, counter to the divorce case, Taruna Batra went and lodged an FIR. And after lodging of the FIR, all the three, that is the father-in-law, the mother-in-law, the sister-in-law, they were arrested. But soon as they were arrested, after 3 days of their arrest, they were granted bail. Now, so there was a rising tension between the family and Taruna Batra, and in between, Taruna Batra shifted to her parents' residence. And what Amit Batra, her husband, did was he shifted in a different flat at Ghaziabad. Later on, Taruna Batra tried to return to her old home, that is in her in-laws' home at Ashok Bihar, but found it locked, and therefore she filed a mandatory injunction to enable her to enter the house. But before any order could be passed, she forcibly broke into and entered that residence. So the matter went to the High Court, and from the High Court, it went to the Supreme Court. And when the issue reached to the Supreme Court brought a very landmark judgment clarifying the legal definition of a shared household. Now, till now, I was saying that no other legislation has given her right of residence in that household, that is, in the household of in-laws, and or the word used in Domestic Violence Act is shared household. That is, both the partners have been residing together. So here, the Supreme Court determined in order for a home to be considered as a shared household, either the husband must either own the property, or he must pay rent of the property, or the house must belong to a joint family of which the husband is a member. Now, in this case, what is found is actually the owner of this house was Taruna Batra's mother-in-law. So mother-in-law, and therefore, because the title belonged to the mother-in-law, the court ruled that the property in question does not count as a shared household, and because it doesn't count as the shared household, she does not have the right of residence there. The citation I just now gave you, and the definition that has been mentioned in Section 2S of the Domestic Violence Act, shared household means household would only mean a house belonging to or take or rent by the husband, or the house which belongs to the joint family of which the husband is a member, or where a rent has to be given by the husband. That actually is the definition of a shared household. So this is one of the landmark cases. The second landmark cases is woman in relationship is protected under Domestic Violence Act, and the case is D. Veluswamy versus D. Patachayamal, reported in 2010, volume 10 SCC at page 469, wherein the Supreme Court has given a verdict that who comes under the definition of live-in relationship. So to prove a case under live-in relationship, the 5 ingredients have to be satisfied. And what are the 5 ingredients? Number 1, both the parties must behave as husband and wife and are recognized as husband and wife in front of society. So it is not that you spend 2 or 3 nights with a so-called man and say we are in relationship. No, that is not recognized under law. Number 2, they must be of a valid legal age of marriage. So underage doesn't establish a live together or live in relationship. 3, they should qualify to enter into a marriage. Example, none of the partners should have a spouse living. So that is another ingredient to satisfy to bring a case under live-in relationship. Number 4, they must have voluntarily cohabited for a significant period of time. And number 5, they must have lived together in a shared household. So if the husband is paying a rent, or the title of the property belongs to the husband, or the husband is a member of that joint family where they live together, then only it can qualify as a shared household, and then only in such a circumstances, the woman of live-in together can establish a case that she had lived with such a partner. So here the Supreme Court observed that the relationship, a live-in relationship, will amount to a relationship in a nature of marriage to get the benefit of the Domestic Violence Act. And it cannot be a status of a keep or a concubine. She lives for him for a temporary period, goes away, and again comes and lives. So she cannot have a status of a concubine. It some way or the other must establish before the society that they are living as husband and wife. So this is second, a very beautiful case wherein for the first time, women of live-in relationship can claim relief under the Domestic Violence Act. That is, she can even claim maintenance against the Domestic Violence Act, because in a way it is a human and civil rights protection section. You can see section 2F, 2S, 3A, 34A, the relationship in a nature of marriage. So this has been again recognized. It has been recognized in USA. It is the scope and its applicability is also being recognized in India too. And the third case is again wherein is the Lalita Toppo versus State of Jharkhand and others, wherein the court, the bench, the court, that is the Supreme Court, has explained Section 3 of the Domestic Violence Act, which defines what a domestic violence is, and also says, and also that the woman, the wife, can claim maintenance here. That is, the estranged wife can, in a live-in relationship, can claim even maintenance under Section 125 of the CRPC. Now, under Section 125 of the CRPC has given a definition of a wife. And who is a wife? She has to be a legally wedded woman. That is the wife. And in under Indian laws, it is only one spouse, that is the wife, that is the first marriage, until and until she dies or she's divorced. It is that wife who can claim maintenance. So under Section 25, the only proof that was required was that she's a legally wedded wife. But here, in this case, that is the famous case which has been very much talked, the case of 2018. It is a 2018 case, Lalita Toppo versus State of Jharkhand and another, wherein she has established that she was the so-called wife in live-in relationship, and she wanted a maintenance from the partner of hers. Although she was an advocate, it was negated by the Jharkhand High Court. But when it reached to the Supreme Court says that under Domestic Violence Act, since live-in relationship has been established, and she is a woman who could establish the so-called wife in live-in relationship, the so-called woman in live-in relationship, she's entitled to get maintenance under the Domestic Violence Act. So these are three cases which are landmark cases, which I think every law student who has passed out or who has just entered into practice must know and must be a savior to the victims who has been victimized or who has been abused in a marriage that comes under the Domestic Violence Act. Now, over to you, Anvesha Ghosh.
Yes, ma'am. I think we had a really wonderful session today, and there have been many questions that have come up. So there is this one question. I'll just point out the questions to you. Ma'am, is any limit on legal fee is there? Someone is asking this question. I am not clear.
What limit?
Is there any limit on legal fee?
On legal fee? No, there's no limit.
Okay, ma'am.
Actually, the victim, because she's victimized, she can take legal assistance. She has the right of free counseling also. So there's no limit of legal fee.
Okay.
Fee can never be limited. Yes, it depends upon the status of a lawyer if one is into practice. Yes.
Ma'am, also there are questions like Ankita Kundu has stated you this question. If either wife or husband applied for a mutual divorce, but the consent of wife or husband takes place forcefully or coercively for the divorce, is there any defense for this?
Yes. First of all, under Section 13B, there should be no force, no fraud, no undue influence. So if the wife is able to prove that her consent was taken by force or fraud, at the very instant, it cannot be a case under Section 13B of the Hindu Marriage Act. But domestic violence is very different. Section 13B is a divorce under mutual consent. Here in domestic violence, we are not at all talking of divorce per se. What we are talking about, the cruelty meted to her. So there can be two remedies, two options. As a lawyer, you can advise to that victim. One is whether she wants a protection from the so-called husband, because after all, he has got some sort of authority on her, or whether she wants to go in for divorce. Domestic violence doesn't give the relief under Section 13 of the Hindu Marriage Act. It is not talking about divorce. As I told you right in the beginning of my talk, it gives a protection to the so-called victim concerned. And therefore, the magistrate has to pass an order within the period of 60 days. where in section 13B, it says not prior to 6 months and not later than 18 months. So prior to 6 months, the family court, the judge of the family court cannot take any action. So there's a lot of difference between the procedure in the Domestic Violence Act and the procedure in section 13B of the Hindu Marriage Act.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, there is a question from one of my very known faculties, Amrita Datta from Haldia Law College. She has
Right.
asked you, ma'am, why do you think, or what are your views, why such domestic violence cases has increased during the lockdown period?
Yeah, there are 2-3 reasons. The one reason is, now you will find if there is a abuse in the lower strata or even in the middle class family where the woman is working because she's into the household and the husband, let's say the husband doesn't go out to work, she in fact is the first person who is the victim of his rage, of his anger. And many a times what happens in the lower classes, if he starts beating her, what the woman does, I was reading in one of the cases, the woman goes out of a house to the lanes, to the small lanes where her household may be, and her neighbors may come out for protection. So that gives an excuse to the woman that she's protected from the woman. And this normally happens in the lower strata of the family, where there are clubbed households. But now, since during the lockdown period, everybody is within the house. You have to maintain social distancing. Neither the neighbor can come into any help. Even in the institutional level also, none can come for any help. So as a result, domestic violence is an increase. You will find less cases of kidnapping and abduction nowadays. But you will find more cases, especially after the liquor shops have opened, that there has been a rise of domestic violence, the anger. Secondly, there has been a loss of employment. Many men have lost their jobs, so where they should ventilate out their anger. Third, financial constraints. That is one of the main reasons of domestic violence. Neither the woman can go out for her work. If she's a domestic helper, possibly she may also have lost her job. She's not getting any salary for the last 2 months. The man who is also a worker may have doesn't have any source of income. In such circumstances, the violence, that is the psychological violence, increases. So these may be some of the reasons why there has been a increasing trend of domestic violence. The anger comes out within the household, the frustration.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, there is this question from Amia Singh. Ma'am, can LGBT community couples seek protection or maintenance after SC Supreme Court judgment?
The domestic violence has been passed in 2005. As such, it does not cover LGBT community. It only talks about the victim concern. But yes, one can try under the Domestic Violence Act, because if they are gay couples and there has been abusive relationship, yes, one can file a case. But then again, the gender comes into question. The big question is that of gender. So law needs to be amended that way. Not only a Domestic Violence Act, I feel most of the personal laws needs amendment that way, needs to be modified, because the actual nomenclature used is husband and wife. So one has to qualify under the definition of husband and wife. Now, gay couples here has not been taken off, or not such a case has come up. Of course, it is a long battle for them. As such, I have not come across, I know they have abusive relationship. I'm known to that, but whether they can file under the Domestic Violence Act, they can have a try, but I'm not sure what the law can speak of. Because the definition has to be established, some sort of relationship of marriage. If gender is not in question, the gay couples can file a case. Yes.
Ma'am, there is this next question by Roshan Kumar. Do you think that marital rape should be criminalized?
Well, this is not a question of domestic violence. It is a question of IPC. I don't think I refrain from answering right now on this question.
Okay, sure,
It's
ma'am.
beyond the topic he's talking about. Yeah.
Yes, right, ma'am. Ma'am, there is this question from Andeep Chopra. He says, after striking down of 497, what are the
Hmm.
conditions for live-in relationship? Woman is not the chattel as per Supreme Court judgment.
I have just now told you, you have to establish to bring a case under live-in relationship. It cannot be just merely a keep or a concubine. You have to establish before the society that there has been a long relationship to prove a case that you are a woman or the so-called wife of that man. It may not be a marriage as per Section 5 read with Section 7 of the Hindu Marriage Act, but yes, you have to establish the society should recognize that relationship as husband and wife. Then only you can bring a case. I've told you, just now told you what are the ingredients in the Supreme Court case to bring a case under live-in relationship.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, there is this next question from Saif Rasul Khan. He has written, isn't the negotiation problematic, especially when the woman is economically dependent on the husband?
Yes, the negotiation negotiation is problematic, but before the negotiation is the counseling part. So the counselor, as I told you, the magistrate or the protection officer should take help of the counselor who is an expert or who is an expert in this field. So that way, negotiation is not difficult. If the husband is not taking care financially of his wife, don't you think she has a right to ask for maintenance before him, either through the protection officer or through the court? Because in a way, she's a neglected wife, or she's a humiliated wife. So as a wife, it is the duty of the husband to take care of her, either financially, either emotionally, either otherwise, to satisfy her from all aspects. So I don't think so negotiation is that way difficult. First of all, the husband has to realize that he needs to respect his wife. And once that is put inside him as a matter of respect, he has to take care of her.
Ma'am,
So I don't think so negotiation that way is a very difficult affair. I mean, from an adamant man to counsel that adamant man, bring him into the track. Yes, there are a lot of tactics that needs to be applied, and therefore one has to take help of a counselor or a service provider like NGOs.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is from Ashish Pandey. He writes, is dowry prohibited only in laws or in practical sense in the society as well? Dowry
In practical,
yes.
we have got a lot of legislation. It's a very good question. Had that been so much implemented, then you would not have thought of dowry. And even still today, although the legislation is there, a groom is always, especially northern side of India, dowry is one of the mandatory features in marriage. So there is a legislation, but the parents say then her girl will not get married. So dowry has become a part of marriage. It was Vardakshina. It had initially started giving Vardakshina to the bridegroom. That Vardakshina took the shape of dowry. So the ample greed of the bridegroom and his parents needs to be satisfied. So had you been an IS officer, I'm surely 100% I can say that even you would have also asked for dowry. So that's quite in practice. We have the law, we have the legislation, but one has to be gutsy enough to bring cases against the dowry, which somehow or the other is lacking in our society.
Right, ma'am. Ma'am, there is this again a question from Shweta Modanwal. She's asking, what are the proof for false filing case of domestic violence? What are the proof? What are the
Proof
proof?
is she has to just come and complain before the protection officer, before the NGO. She can take help of the NGO, or there can be medical evidence. If there has been a beating and a beating to such an extent where a medical help is required, she may have those medical reports and can show it to the court itself that, look, this has been. And now it is beating not for continuously. One beating is enough to prove a case of cruelty. So she can bring before the court, but prima facie, yes, she must have some evidence, because there are a lot of false cases also that the woman is bringing only to wrap the husband and her and his family under 498A. That she must not do. She has to have some logical proof of the same. As I told you, a report before an NGO, a complaint before the protection officer, and the protection officer writes down in writing. So those are conclusive evidence that she came and complained before the protection officer. I mean, if she's battered, if she's beaten, she must have some medical evidences. If she even giving not food to her, that can also be an evidence. So all this, she can speak it out. There has to be a prima facie case before the judicial magistrate. It's not that one can concoct a story and wrap the husband and his in-law and his parents because you need to satisfy yourself.
Ma'am, there is this question from Himanshu Jain, which is quite interesting. He has written, why all the failed marriages turn into domestic violence?
Obviously, if there had been a good understanding between the husband and wife, marriage would not have failed. Somewhere that understanding could not be set up. And somebody, because of the misunderstanding factor, it's where the expectation is very much from the husband. The expectation is a lot for the woman. And when these expectations are not reached, when the husband has a dream, but then he gets a woman who cannot reach to his dream, is where actually there's a crash. The reality is something different. For a woman also, the reality is something different. So when there's a crash of dreams, when there's a lack of understanding, misunderstanding starts going. When there is, one has to also be about guarded language. One has to speak in a guarded language. What you can do in your mother's home, you cannot do in the in-laws' home. There's an entirely a different new chapter begin. And all these things need to be taken care. If these things, and also the tolerance for each other, their habits, the patience, the tolerance, that is, or that also lacks. And that is the reason it becomes a failed marriage. And when it becomes a failed marriage, obviously you have to take recourse to the law. And once you recourse to the law, is that when the allegations on each other start, either it may be for domestic violence, or it may be for divorce, or it may be for separation, or it may be for maintenance, or it may be for custody of children. So this is what actually it is in failed marriages.
Ma'am, there is this next question from Ramesh. Can relatives of the woman lodge FIR before judicial magistrate?
So normally it is the complaint, the victim concern. It is expected the victim concern can lodge a complaint. But the second thing is that if somebody is a witness to that event, then in that case, the relative of the woman can also lodge a complaint, provided he or she knows that such an incident has been taken case of. So if he's a witness of that incident, yes, one can come and lodge a complaint. But normally, the law says it is the wife, the complainant, the victim concerned, who has to lodge a complaint.
Ma'am, there is yet again another question from Pia Kapoor, who says, how can a man claim for the custody of the child? How can a man claim for the custody of the child?
Now, in Domestic Violence Act, the custody has not that much been explained. It says that if a woman is thrown off and her child is with her husband's family, she can ask for a custody. Now, for a man to take a custody, obviously she has to, either there is a Hindu law, custody of a children, under Hindu guardians, Hindu Adoption and Hindu Guardianship Act, if the couples are Hindus by religion. So there's a Guardianship Act wherein the man can claim guardian. But the primary factor here again is the court has to take into consideration the welfare of the child, the interest of the child, where the child is comfortable to look into it. So that the husband has to establish before the court that he can take care of the welfare of the child, he's financially sound, he's emotionally close to the child, then only he can claim custody of the child. Otherwise, it becomes difficult. I mean, it's a loggerhead between the mother and the father, the husband and the wife, and it's the child who is in between who doesn't know what to do. So the court takes Section 13 of the Guardianship Act, which says that the paramount consideration is for the welfare of the child. That is how the court has to look into it. In Domestic Violence Act, guardianship of the child for the offender has not been talked about. It is for the protection of the victim. So much legislation is pro-victim, pro-woman that way, not for the man.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, there is this question by Maulik. If a man is filing for divorce as the wife has committed adultery, is the wife liable to get alimony?
If the wife has filed for divorce, for adultery.
The man is filing for divorce as the wife has committed adultery. In that case, can a wife, wife is liable to get alimony?
See, first of all, it is not easy to prove adultery in the court of law because adultery depends upon preponderance of all probabilities. All probable reasons should be established that adultery has taken place. So just bringing a charge against his wife that she has adulterous relationship is not enough for the court. The court is not going to grant any relief until and unless you have proved before the court that such an adulterous act has taken place. Now, behind the closed doors, until and unless you have a camera in the room, it is very difficult to prove a case of adultery. So it has to be 2 + 2 that makes flow. All probable reasons has to be there to establish before the court that yes, she has got an adulterous relationship. Just bringing a charge doesn't suffice the case. Now, in such a situation, maintenance from the woman can only claim maintenance if she doesn't have any means to support her. That has to be a primary objective. If she's a leading doctor and suddenly the husband says she has an adulterous relationship with a fellow doctor, that is not enough to prove a case. I mean, for a doctor, it is well accepted that she has to work with such male members. For an IAS officer, she has to work with such male members. For a corporate executive, she has to work with her peers over there. So just simply bringing a charge is not enough. And if the woman has financially sound, of course, she cannot claim maintenance. She can only claim maintenance, A, if she is established, if she can establish before the court, A, that she is not financially sound, and 2, that the husband is not taking care of her financially or otherwise. Then only she can get maintenance. Otherwise, how will she prove before the court of law? So making a charge does not establish as a charge. You can make an allegation, but that allegation needs to be proved in the court of law, especially in case of adultery. So adultery is very difficult to prove. Yes.
Ma'am, there is this next question by Ankita Kundu. She asks you, if a wife is financially much stable than the husband, then husband can claim the alimony in this case.
In Domestic Violence Act, as I told you, it is pro-woman, but the husband can claim maintenance under Section 24 and 25 of the Hindu Marriage Act only if the parties are Hindus. That is the first legislation which has brought husband at par with the woman. So vice versa. If the husband wants, he can claim alimony, that is a maintenance from his wife who is financially sound. Yes. If both the parties are Hindus, as such in Domestic Violence Act, no. No such provision is there.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, there is this question by Utkarsh Karan. Ma'am, what about men? They are also facing domestic violence in today's world. So he wants to know what you can tell about
I'm
it.
sorry, I won't be able to answer because domestic violence talks about the victim women and they are the vulnerable section of the society. That is why this legislation has come out. So I
Okay.
won't be able to answer his question. I'm sorry for that.
I get it, ma'am. Ma'am, there is this question again by Shweta Modangalwal. She says, what are the essentials for filing the case of domestic violence, DV?
What are the essentials?
Yes, ma'am.
I have explained in my 1 hour of lecture what are the requirements that is required to file a case under Domestic Violence Act. You have to prove what do you understand by domestic violence. So in the beginning stage of my lecture only, I've said to file a case under Domestic Violence Act, you need to know the definition: physical abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, or sexual abuse. If the
Okay.
quantum comes under these four clauses, then you can file a case under domestic violence. I have explained, right? So she has to look under, she has to go and go back and see Section 3 of the Domestic Violence Act, and she will understand her question herself.
Also, Shweta, we are requesting you to again go to the, after the live session ends, you can see what ma'am has explained. I think that will.
In my and then that will clear her doubts once again.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, there is this question by Amit Dahiya. Is there any case law supporting that men can also get maintenance from his wife?
Yeah, there are supporting case laws, but right in front, I do not have. Yes, there are quite a few case laws. One can look into it.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, there is this question by Dolly Biswas. Does a government job holder woman can claim maintenance?
Yes, yes. Why not?
Yes.
Because just doing a job does not wash away the liability of a husband not paying her.
Okay, ma'am.
Job cannot be a rider, cannot be a criteria of not getting ample amount of maintenance. If the husband is continuously neglecting her, she can file a case for maintenance. But chances are remote. But even then, it is also the duty of the liability of the husband to take care of his wife, whether wife is in job or she's financially independent.
Ma'am, there is this question by Amrita Datta, ma'am. Again, she is one of the faculty. So she has asked if on information or FIR, the protection officer reaches her or her place, and then if she is not ready to accept the violence or the torture, then what shall be done?
I cannot get the question. The protection officer reaches
The
to the victim's place, yes, and then what
she is
happens?
not ready to accept the violence or the torture that has been gone through her, then what shall be done? If she is denying the thing that she had,
Then obviously the case drops.
right,
The
ma'am.
case drops
Right, ma'am.
because initially she might have thought that to bring with a complaint, and then now she withdraws. So if she withdraws, the case has to be dropped.
Right, ma'am. Ma'am, there's this question by Pia Kapoor. Does a working woman entitled to alimony?
Yeah, it's the same question
Yes,
that
ma'am.
one more question has a working woman. Like suppose if one is a school teacher and she just gets a paltry amount of 7,000, is that 7,000 well enough to maintain her? Number one. So it depends upon how good you are placed in a job. Number two is that from which background you come. If you come from a very good background and you are just having a job only for the sake of killing your boredom, at the same time you know that the husband is not taking care of, that doesn't mean you won't get maintenance. So for a case of maintenance, you have to, as I'm all the time saying, you have to prove that you are a neglected wife. The husband is neglecting you and he's willfully neglecting you. Two, and that is one of the reasons why you have taken the job. Had he been supporting you, many a times women may not have taken the job. So job cannot be a hindrance for not getting the money that way. But if the job is, if you are a top corporate executive and then you want maintenance, and therefore the court has to think twice. So you can bring an allegation that the husband actually is not taking care, but there you cannot ask the court to give grant to maintenance. It depends upon what type of a nature of job you're doing. An IS officer will refrain from taking maintenance, But a poor school teacher might like to have a maintenance. It depends upon what is the status and what is the nature of job and how much of salary you're getting. You have to prove the case before the court of law. So it is differs from case to case basis.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, there's this question by Gausia. Though DV is a speedy remedy, why many cases are pending in that case?
Why?
Many cases are still pending. Even if domestic violence is a speedy remedy, why many
No,
cases?
that of course the judiciary can give you the answer why it
Right,
is pending. The cases are piling up, so I think there the judges will be able to give you answer because of the piling of the cases, because there are not the number of judges in district court are not sufficient. There may be several executive reasons for not getting the case disposed of quickly.
Okay, ma'am.
Even in family court, the case has to be disposed. It is an expeditious nature of the trial that goes on. But then in family court also, cases are pending for long. So there are a lot of cases in family court, lot of cases before the judicial magistrate. He has to dispose it of. So as per his the piling of cases, the judge has to work accordingly. And there are piling of cases in High Court, in Supreme Court. Why are the reasons? There's not a number of judges in the High Court or in the Supreme Court to dispose of the cases. Therefore, the cases are also piling up.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, we have already exceeded 10 minutes, but still there are so many questions I can't tell.
We can entertain those questions in our next episode, which we will have.
It will be the part 2 of ma'am's episode. Again, next Sunday, the same time, she will be describing more, giving us more insight. And ma'am, people have been asking for PPTs. They want your notes for case law, but I guess, I don't know. This is a webinar. So
I will think over that. But because today I just concentrated on the quick remedy, that is one of the case, we can bring the case under the Domestic Violence Act, which of course is not an old legislation. It is a very new legislation, 2005. Maybe in the next episode, I may come up with a different type of my lecture focusing on the personal laws that is applicable in marriages. Different religion has different personal laws, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Parsis. So we can discuss on that in my next episode if I'm given an opportunity by this platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. It has been a wonderful session. I mean, I have been your student. I know what you can impart to the legal world. Today, I guess many who have joined us know what you are and how excellent academician you have always been. And today you again proved to be the same.
Thank you very much. I'm humbled and honored once again. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, the team, Into Legal World team, they have come up with such a legal awareness because it is not always that people talk about, but this happens in everyday life. And Richa Shukla, Amresh Patel, they are the mind behind this team. Again, there are Abhishek Tripathi who handles the IIT. He had to go through a lot to organize the webinars because we had so many registrations, ma'am. You wouldn't believe the registrations went like 1200, 1500 in seconds. And then we had to manage. And then the questions were random. We had to select questions because it was not, we were not able to handle it. So the others also, like Vishu, Utkarsh, everyone gave their entire support to the team. It's an amazing experience, ma'am.
Right, it's been a wonderful, and I hope I have been able to satisfy the team and the participants as well. Thank you very much. God bless all of you. Be safe. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. We can sign off now, and we will be again in the next session on Sunday, the same time. That is 5 to 6:30, and ma'am will be there with us. So if you wish to join, I am sure most of you are willing to join. So please come and join us, and do subscribe and like our page because you will get not only this webinar's address, but there are a lot of other things that you can go on with. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Have a safe life. Stay safe and sound. Thank you.